Welcome back, everybody. So I'm super, super excited today to introduce Kim Zmeskal. So I know some people are listening. They're like, wait, I know that name. How do I know that name? How do I recognize that name? Well, I tell you how you know that name because Kim Zmeskal made the gymnastics record books by becoming the first American to win the all-around at the World Gymnastics Championships in 1991. That same year, you were named the U.S. Olympic Committee's Sportswoman of the Year, the March of Dimes Athlete of the Year, the only competitor to win more than one individual event at the 1992 World Championships in gymnastics. You won a gold medal on the balance beam and the floor exercise, three-time U.S. national champion, scored eight perfect tens in your competitive career, a 92 Olympic bronze medalist, two-time AAU Sullivan Award nominee, which honors the nation's top amateur athlete. You retired briefly, and then you and I were just talking about this, came back and trained in Cincinnati with Mary Lee Tracy, made the U.S. national team in 1998, and then retired again in 2000. In 2001, you were inducted into the USA Gymnastics Hall of Fame. Anybody that I've ever spoken to that has been in the world of gymnastics, right? A lot of the athletes that I've worked with, a lot of the friends that I've had, a lot of the people I've had on this podcast, um, people that I'm not related to, my sister-in-law, your name comes up time and time again as somebody that really has not only put USA Gymnastics on the map, and obviously there was a few people, one person in particular before you that is pretty well known in US gymnastics history, Mary Lou Retton, but just again, just like starting to establish a culture of excellence, a culture of winning, being able to compete and do it in a way that made it look fun. I earlier today got a text from a good friend of mine that I went to med school with, whose daughter is a gymnast. And so she follows my podcast. I had Kyla Ross on here at one point, and they met her later and like sent a picture of her to me, and they were like, "We brought you up and how we had listened to your podcast." And so actually today I released a podcast of a gymnast, Olivia Karras, who competed for Michigan as a Big Ten analyst. And my friend texted me and said, "Listen, I love the guest you have recently and you're crushing it." And I said, "You're never going to believe who I'm going to talk to tonight." She's like, "Who?" I'm like, "You recognize Kim Zmeskal?" And she goes, "You know what?" She goes, "Her rock around the clock routine is still my all-time favorite." So I wanted to bring that back to you and throw you a little piece of nostalgia.
Oh,
But
thank you.
thank you for coming on.
I really appreciate that introduction. I always say like, yes, I did gymnastics back in the 1900s. And and honestly, it's funny you say, retired back in 2000. I honestly, it makes me feel like that's when I started. Because I didn't have any ambition to go into coaching or anything that was going to keep me with the sport. And it felt like that was kind of the birth of what my life has been these last, 24, 25 years.
What's funny, right? Like we put so much into sport, right? And you've gotten a lot out of it when I read it on paper. But when you look at all the hours you've put in, all the things you've given up, relatively speaking, those are still minimal returns. And so when you can then look and it leads to other things and the way of investing back in and also being able to get back from the sport, I think it provides a lot of value, right? And you realize, wow, this sport not only provided me certain opportunities and challenged me in certain ways, but I've learned so much about myself and the way that I can continue to impact others, and you and I again were talking about my experience with sport and how I'm doing it and coaching in a different way and in a different avenue. So no, I'm excited to connect with you finally and to have this conversation. And here's where I want to start, right? We just listed all these things you've done back in the 1900s and some of the things you've been doing since, but like, how did you get exposed to gymnastics and really from there, your mindset to really kind of excel and really dive into the sport, if you will?
Well, I think how I was introduced and like the circumstances around it have been like so incredibly impactful for where I am today. Because it's still like we talk about intention, like setting it from the beginning. I started gymnastics not knowing what gymnastics was. My parents were from small town Texas. Neither of them had any idea other than seeing Nadia Comaneci and, the Olympics and which was like the year I was born, they didn't know anything about it. And I apparently, because I don't remember this, but apparently I came home, I was 6 years old, and my babysitter's daughter had a gymnastics class once a week. And so she brought me up there for the hour that her daughter was going to be in class. And I guess I was not okay with this. I mean, I guess I came home and said, Jenny's mom wouldn't let me play on the playground, because that's all I saw it as. And I've really tried to keep that like with me forever, especially with my role in the gymnastics world right now, with having an opportunity to um, show gymnastics to, new generations, is that, I want them to walk into, my gym here in the Dallas area, to be able to, this is a playground, and to not lose that part of it, no matter if you want it to be, a Sunday afternoon, playing on the swing set, or, you want to see any kind of art that you can create on it, and see if you can put yourself in the pressure cooker and see if you can, do that, on call. So, I feel really, really grateful for that. And I happened to start at the gym that Bella and Marta Crowley bought the year that I got there. And, in less than 2 years, Mary Lou Retton was not only training there, but came home with an Olympic gold medal. With, to me as an 8-year-old, I saw it as like the most real life, like, this is what you do, right? You play on this playground, and these are the opportunities that you have. This will be great. It's on the, cover of USA Today magazine, a newspaper, as an 8-year-old, as, it said the next Mary Lou's, and I just believed it. I was like, oh, they said I'm going to do that. Okay, okay. Right. Like, so it opened up the possibilities right from the start. Like, it wasn't, I always, give the comparison of like looking at a movie star and, going like, wow, like that seems like such an untouchable fantasy land. To me, doing Olympic level sport on a playground seemed like the normal thing, right? Before I was 10 years old.
Well, it's cool too because that's what you saw, right? And you're exposed to it in a natural way, it sounds like,
Yeah.
right? Like how
Yeah.
many
Yeah.
times do we see kids go to a playground and they're just in awe of like the
Yeah.
bars and the swings and what other kids are doing, and they want to be a part of it, and they jump in and they're not as scared because they see other kids having fun and smiling and laughing. So even, as a 6-year-old, to kind of see that and also be like upset that you can't play even furthers that motivation, right? Because then when you get on that, you're like, I'm not getting off.
Exactly. Exactly.
The other interesting thing you said, which I want to highlight, and I don't know if you know this, but it has to do with the way our brains process experience. So our brains don't process in terms of chronological time. It processes experience in terms of experiential time, right? And there's another guy around your time named John Coyle, who was an Olympic speed skater,
Mhm.
right? Who had this experience where he finished, split second later
Mhm.
than he wanted to. So he got the silver medal and was doing an Olympic tour. And there was a young person that saw him, right? Got a chance to take a picture with him, touch his medal. And in
Mhm.
that moment, in that like 10 or 15-second interaction, that kid realized this is a possibility. I want this, because he was in a small town. They were doing a tour,
Yeah.
and he looked at that and his father said, you know what, if you want that, like, you can work hard and like it's possible. And so years later, John's working for NBC Sports doing the Olympics, right?
Yeah.
This parent comes up to him and says, listen, I just want to introduce myself. You changed my kid's life however many years ago. He took a picture with you, held your silver medal. And in that moment, he decided he wanted to be a speed skater, and he's skating in the final tomorrow. And it kind of redefined for him what these experiences are like. And it's not just about getting the gold. And if you don't get the gold, you're
Yeah.
the
Of
first loser, if you will.
course. Of
It
course.
was really more about like this experience of greatness and seeing how touchable it is. And for you to see that as an 8-year-old,
Yeah.
right, in your own backyard, like, what's more motivating and inspiring than that?
Right. I mean, and the thing about it is I didn't know what impact I was having. I'm confident my parents didn't. I mean, it's not like they intentionally, brought me in to, think that this was going to happen. I'm going to send my kid to, whether it's even just the babysitter or, go over to, the gym to take classes. But that has really stuck with me. I mean, how many times we say, like, if you can imagine it, you have a better opportunity for it to happen. If you've seen it, if you've tasted it, if you've touched it, like those are all like little things that make things more real. I even say, like, there's a lot of, what happens, I feel like, out on that floor, that I say, like, I think a lot of our frustration happens because the power of like seeing it first. Like I was like, I've already seen this, like it's reality, like it has already happened. And when you can see that as a young person and not even realize that you're doing it, like it's huge. And like I said, so it's been impactful in a way that I try to even mention that to the kids around here who are excelling, and just reminding them like how big of an impact you can have on, just walking by that kid in a class, right? And then they see you, doing something, and like you have now made yourself a real person doing excellent, huge things, and you have no idea what that will do. They may not even exactly remember that moment, but that you've made that impact on, something being real that they, will chase after later. Maybe in this sport, maybe somewhere else.
Absolutely. Well, and what's interesting about the brain too is, as smart as the brain can't distinguish between fantasy and reality, right? So like when you see it, and like you said, you see it and you imagine it, like your brain believes it's real. And so now it's going to change the narrative where this is a real possibility. Now, in your case too, and in the case of what you're referring to, like when you see somebody else can do it, you see that it's possible. It also exemplifies that it is real, like because there it is right there in the flesh. Like this is what it looks like, and those things are huge and they're impactful. Let me ask you this. So you talked about how you started the gym, and it happens to be the gym where Bella and Marta Caroli buy it, right? And in the sport of gymnastics, anybody who knows gymnastics, follows gymnastics, particularly at that time, knows
Yeah.
who Bella and Marta Caroli were, right? And so here's my question for you. As you're training under, these world-class Hall of Fame coaches, how did you sort of, their level of intensity, right, is just unmatched, right? Like, and so talk a little bit about the experience and sort of the balance of pushing an athlete to be their best, but also helping them feel supported as an individual.
Right. Well, I think that I also came at it, like my comeuppance in that gym is very unique, because there was a lot of athletes that ended up, moving to train there. Um, and I do feel like a lot of like the way that I responded to them did come from the fact that I didn't seek that out, right? I didn't know who they were. They weren't something until, like, I hate to say it that way, right? But it was very, it just, I really do think it changed the ways that I reacted to them. There wasn't open communication, which again, I've done a lot of, there's, when I say, like, I feel like I started back in 2000, I mean, it really is a little bit even before that, right? But I feel like this kind of this journey through, like, who am I? What has this been? Who are the people who have impacted me like that, like they have? And their intensity I can make sense of, right? That, living in communist Romania, so um, harsh of a life, and something that they wanted something different, that they even, left their daughter, who they are very close with, to, make something like that happen, um, that they didn't have skills of communication, right? It's not something that they had. But that doesn't mean that if you're not verbally communicating, that you're not communicating, right? So, I mean, I learned, like, just communication styles that I've really had to try very hard to unlearn, right? But that was kind of my defense, mechanism of, being in a very intense environment, that I would roll my eyes. I mean, just things that, like, it's humiliating, I mean, I've apologized to them over and over, and to them, even, it hasn't been a big deal. They were like, no, you had to be like that. Like, they don't even understand what the problem is, right? It's like, it truly bothers me. I don't want, that to be, the style that I would ever promote and, help, these other kids with. Honestly, it feels like it's like the most important piece, is like trying to help with tools on, like, this is how you feel, it's real. This is how we can communicate together with it. Because other than that, I mean, like I said, we are, human beings are meant to survive scenarios. And that was my best way, going through some, hard. I knew very well, like what I was trying to do. And so I remember actually like a comment that I would, make as a teenager, because people would ask me all the time, kind of the question of, what is it like to have Bella as the coach? And I just remember always saying something to the point of, well, I'm not only asking him to help me be a good gymnast or even a great gymnast, like I'm asking him to help me be the best in the world. Um, so I definitely was going about it with that, but at the same time, I wasn't going to just sit back and agree with everything, I guess is what it would be. I mean, but that's, like I said, it's been a big motivation to like learn, like, again, who am I? Who are these people? And are there better ways to help, not only communicate, but give our feelings like the attention it deserves without, you know what I mean? Like trying to find the balance, I guess, of like when and how to, kind of walk through what we're feeling at any time. And that goes, honestly, that's for the coaches as well. Um, I I'm really grateful for the athletes that I've gotten to work with, particularly over these last kind of two quads, because it's been like, for me as like a human and as a coach, it's been more helpful that I can say to be able to know that we're like both sides are working through this together. Like, these are the feelings that I'm having. I feel like I'm struggling with that. And, that was not a way that I was raised with, and surely not a way that they were raised with either.
I think it's interesting, right? You bring up this idea that coaches are people, right? And people have experiences and they have people that, they have ways that their life circumstances also shape them and their way of interacting with their environment, right? So I think that's also an important thing that we don't always understand when we're watching it, right? We're like, how can you yell at these kids? How can you do this? But again, you bring up a good point of the circumstances in which one person is raised or the environment in which shapes them definitely impacts how they interact. What's also interesting, though, and I appreciate this, is while it might be perceived as disrespectful, the fact that you're rolling your eyes, it sounds like you were also finding a way to support yourself as an individual, right? Is so while they were pushing you to be the best in the world, you also found a way in that situation to also kind of advocate for yourself and support yourself. While it might have been disrespectful, in a way of sort of articulating in some form of communication, may not verbal, but like, I'm not okay with this, or I'm going to step up for myself, and learning your own independence and your own growth, and then being able to then develop a collaborative relationship, which is not necessarily based on verbal communication, like you
Right.
said, but it doesn't mean
Right.
you're not
But they
communicating.
weren't, and this is where, like, in reflection, that I can go, like, why would they respond? Because respect is, that's, I can't imagine that to not be one of their priority, top characteristics that mean something to them. Like, why would they ever um make it like belittle it, right? When I would apologize about, like, I do not like that, I would talk under my breath, I would this and that. And the way I have perceived it from in reflection is they needed to know what I was thinking and feeling. And because we didn't have anything else set up, we weren't talking through things. That's the only way that they knew that I was tired, or I didn't want to do that again, or I was nervous of something, or, you know what I mean? I felt like that was too much, or, you know what I mean? I wanted to do something again, because it goes on both ways, right? An excitement to take more turns of, like, oh, she must like this, how we're doing this, versus the other way. Um, but I feel like it's made it so that I can be in tune with that as a teacher now. I mean, kind of, it's, talk about it. I feel like I don't think it's talked about enough, or I didn't feel like that, I guess, as like being like walking through the beginning stages of coaching, that, you hear about coaches being coachable, but that I feel like has in general has seemed like it's been more relating like adult to adult versus how much we learn from the kids that we are coaching. And I can still remember, I mean, probably now it's been, over 5 or 6 years ago. But I can remember, like we would line the kids up at the end, and I would say, goodbye, and kind of give my assessment on like, this is how the practice went. This would be, something that would be coming up. And the kids would walk over and, while they're given a hug, which again, kind of seemed like it kind of turned into just a routine. They were saying thank you. And I still can remember standing there, like I was standing by the beams and going like, why wouldn't I say thank you back? Like they're teaching me every day and they're giving me another chance every day. And you know what I mean? That kind of going in from that perspective has honestly, it's taken a weight off of me as like in this coaching role of trying to be perfect too, right? Because it's like a constant being, coaching your just it's constant decisions, right? I mean, we kind of joked before of like, it's you're not going to get this written out in a book with, instructions because, you have, so many personalities that are out there in the coaching world that would follow it, right? Okay, step one, do this, they do it to a T. Like there's so many, like it's just constant decisions, right? And to know that we get to do this together with these individuals that, again, every athlete is going to be a different person every day that they walk in here because of the experiences that they had. Every coach is going to be different because of experiences, and you hope that you can take all of it and keep learning. That's what I hope anyways. I mean, it's part of what is fascinating about this is that it's not on repeat. It's literally every day walking in going, I love this game of life together. And I know it's going to be familiar yet different.
Well, so it's interesting when you say that because this is what I'm thinking. You said it's not routine. Yet in your sport, right?
Mhm.
It's full of routines.
Yeah.
But every floor exercise you do, whether it's to the same song over and over again, it's going to be different, right?
Yeah.
It's going to be different. Every beam you do, it's going to be a little bit different, right? To the average person who watches it might say, oh, I saw this. She did this. This is what's going to happen. And there are certain structures to it, but the art and the creativity, depending on how you're feeling, what your emotional state is, what the crowd is responding, what's going on, where you step, what adjustments you need to make, like the ability and how you talk about this like game of life, I think is also inherent in your sport is that like we have these structures and these routines and we try to do things in a particular order. We talk about consistency, we talk about discipline, we talk about routine, we talk about the importance of all of those. Yet inherent in it is that creativity and that unexpectedness. And for you to even talk about it in the context of like now being a coach and an owner and viewing it that way, I think helps also, like you said it alleviates your pressure, right?
Yeah.
Because I see too is when things need to be a certain way and they need to be quote unquote perfect, right? We talked about how many perfect tens you had, but like when things need to be perfect, it creates a certain amount of pressure where then it puts everybody in a vulnerable state, the athlete, the coach, the
Yeah.
parents, everybody. But when you can see that while it may appear perfect, it's really more about being excellent, right?
Yeah.
And it's more about like being able to adapt to different situations and being able to go into those experiences and know that everyone's going to be different, even though we might all be doing the same exercise. Everybody's going to handle it differently. Everyone's going to respond differently. Some people are going to say thank you. Some people are going to shake my hand. Some people are going to have tears in their eyes. Some people like, and if I can learn to be creative within that structure, now all of a sudden, like I can adapt. Which kind of goes to my question, and you're already starting to talk about, which I really appreciate it, is, when we talk about, again, you competed in the 1900s, as did I, by the way, as did I. And so I hear this now, and I
I
talked
know
about
people can't see, but I mean, we are beautiful. No, I'm just kidding.
100%. No, if this is what
Well, these aren't
1900s looks
these
like,
aren't
then I don't
wrinkles.
want to, I
Come
don't want to be
on.
in today's generation. Like, no, no. Um, but what's really, really interesting to me is like now when I talk to coaches who are, coaches from the 1900s or competed
Yeah,
back then, this concept always comes up about like today's athlete and yesterday's athlete. And like kids today, right? And athletes today are not like yesterday's athlete. And the truth is they're not, but either are the sports and the rules
yeah,
and the way we approach them, right? Everything is different. So you've already started to talk about this idea of communication. You've already talked about even 5 years ago what's a little bit different than now. And so my question is sort of as today's athlete has evolved and as you're kind of continuing to coach, what are some ways that you interact or you inspire your athletes today that kind of differ from either, the way you started coaching or even when you were competing?
Well, I do think it does it is rooted in myself, right? And like how I'm going about it. Um, in the way that I feel like I had like there was such a big judgment that I was putting out there based on I need to be able to get them to XYZ, right? Like it has been, shown that they're, or we're going to use our superpowers and pretend like we have an ability to predict the future and say that you have potential to do all of these things, right? And then to put it on yourself as on myself that it's now my responsibility to make XYZ happen, right? Versus we're going to work on this together as a team. And, you know, that it's, I kind of give like the analogy even of like, think of an island, right? That you see this island and it's beautiful and you have all of your friends with you and you're doing all of these fun things together. Now imagine that same island and no one's there. There's no food. There's no, like, you have to figure it all out, right? And it's like, it's terrifying. I think that's probably one of the biggest things is to me to keep reminding myself, like, I'm, I have a role as a coach, but I want them to understand you're not on this by yourself. Like I know that you ultimately, the part of this that we can't do is the actual go out and do the physical part. Um, but that we are a collective, a team when things are going well and when they're not, when we don't understand why something is happening, and when we can rationalize something that is happening. Um, but I feel like I have changed, and at least I try to, kind of where I'm coming from, of like trying to watch even kind of through like the lens of, um, we're going to try this as best we can. And I'll say like some of the biggest like coaching changes I think that I've allowed myself or just kind of opened the door to has been with Emma Malabuyo, who right now is at UCLA, and she's currently representing the Philippines and like doing all these great, like she's out there competing on her own. And I'm so grateful for her because we were able to kind of walk through, um, this is how like this is how this scenario feels to me. And we would be able to do it on both sides, right? Like these are my concerns, these are your concerns, and then give each other space and then be able to come together and say, I mean, for my part, I've not done it this way. So that part makes me anxious to try it differently. Um, but I trust you. And also I want you to trust me that if I see as we're walking through it, that my fears are showing, right, that I'll speak it. And it's opened the door to, trying things that are, not just what I feel like my one singular experience, um, got to XYZ results, right? Um, I think that's been some of the biggest part is trying to learn when and how to teach that and when and how to partner with. I mean, so the youngest kiddo that I, personally coach just turned 10 years old, and I coach them through graduating through high school. So huge, life changes that are happening during that time, but how important it feels like to me to have that kind of build that type of relationship versus you're looking at me to get you somewhere. And then I'm not allowing either of us to feel like we can and I hate even to call it mistakes because it's really, I really think that, we're all, for the most part, trying our best with the information that we know and don't know. Um, yeah.
This is great. I mean, so here's what I'm hearing, right? As you're saying all of these things, right? Here's what I'm hearing. You used a couple of words. One is you used the word collective, right? You said it's a collective experience. You talked about the fact that we're partnering. you said trust. And you didn't just say trust me. You first said, I trust you, right? And then you said, but I want you to trust me. You also
Yeah.
said, I will let you know if I feel uncomfortable, if my fears. You said that as well.
Hmm.
What I love about all these words, right, is these words talk about a relationship, which you also said, right? And so it's not just I'm the coach, you're the student. I'm a world champion. You want to be a world champion, right? I own the gym. You're at my
Yep.
gym,
Yep.
right? It's more this idea of whether you're 10, whether you're 20, whether you've run, you know, a bunch of medals or whether you've never won a medal, like this idea of thinking about it as a partnership. Communication was a word used earlier as well. Like these words, these terms, what's so important about them is that if we truly want to be great, right? If we truly want to be the best, right? Which you want it to be as an athlete, but if we want to be the best as a coach, we have to understand that what we're doing is we're working with young people. And so if we expect them to trust us, we need to show them trust. If we expect them to believe in us, we have to show them that it's a collective experience, right? If we want them to be a part of the team, we have to partner with them and show them that we're a part of their team. And your ability to use these terms and use them so naturally in this conversation, to me also shows that you're thinking about them and they're intentional, right? And they're intentional part of the experience. And so what I hear time and time again from today's athlete, right, which a lot of them come to me and complain about yesterday's coach, is that they don't listen to me. Like they don't know, like they don't want to hear what I have to say. Yet on the other end, what I teach coaches and what I understand more and more is that if we give them an opportunity and we show some trust in them, we show them that it's a partnership, they're going to open up way more to us. They're going to work way harder for us because they believe that, like you said, they're not alone. And while it might seem like that, right, when you're out there on the beam by yourself, right, but when you've had those conversations, you've had those experiences, you've talked through it together. Then when
Hmm.
you're out there, again, we talked about is when your brain sees something, your mind sees something, it believes it. So it's seen you having those conversations. It's heard those things, right? It believes that I truly am, I have the support of other people. And so while this thing might seem like it's 4 inches, in reality, I got like 10 people on this beam with me, right? And like
Exactly.
they're gonna walk through this, right? And they're gonna help me and they're gonna spot me and they're gonna support me. And all of those things I think is gonna empower young people today to be able to do it and be able to as a sustainable way. Whereas in the past, maybe it was a little bit more done out of fear. But I think we're finding more and more that like the information you're getting from everybody else is if you can feel supported and valued, then you're going to continue to show up and you're going to continue to work your butt off.
Yep.
Right. And in fact, you're going to keep coming back because you
Yep.
know,
And
even if I'm scared, so are they. And they're going to talk to me about it.
yep. And then it feels like it's opening it up to what the true passion is, which is like, how does this sport work, right? And being able to like, it's so fascinating to me still, like how, like, when you put your arm here, or you look that way, or you step with that, do it like this, and you push out through your shoulders, and like it puts it more so that that can end up being what we're talking through versus this feeling of they don't want to do what I'm suggesting, right? Like it opens it up entirely in a different way to go like, like almost validating it beforehand of like this part is supposed to be challenging. It's okay. Like we're all walking in here intentionally to be challenged, and that's including us, right? So that's the adults in here and it's the athletes in here. And how can we keep walking through it? You know what I mean? And trying to give tools um throughout. And those tools are going to be technical tools and physical tools, but they're also, it's kind of try this, try that. I always say that about drills. I go, look, there's not the magic drill, right? We're trying to kind of walk through things like how can we separate, like, okay, we can identify this is what doesn't feel like it doesn't work within that skill to be able to take it out and like, well, let's try to make it accomplishable here. Let's try to make it accomplishable here. For some people doing, this drill over a mat's going to work. And for this one, it's going to be get a spot or, whatever it is. But I feel like it's been the same thing with emotion, as far as like let's give this a try. Just like we have a list of drills that we're going to do to try to break down the skill in an accomplishable way. Can we remove ourselves from the situation enough to say, like, whether that's they can't see it, but like I have a gymnast that I get to work with that drew this. It's written all with the word for, FOUR, right? Because, one of the tools, just as a maybe this works for you, is that 4 count breath, right? Like, and so we, at one of the competitions, we started that, and it was a reminder back and forth, like, this isn't just me to you, right? It's not just you needing to breathe. If you can look over me and I'm not reflecting back something that is, a calm confidence, or you got this, or aggressiveness when it needs to be. We started like doing this like for gang sign, right? We would like just put our hand up, and like, we would both be able to nod and be able to, kind of take it and go like, well, that's a tool that maybe that works for this person. Maybe it doesn't for another, is it, and then we just kind of keep trying those pieces together, and to try to keep thinking of, the how they feel out there and how coaches feel out there as part of the skills that we're trying to learn. No different than learning a double backflip or a giant or this or that, like that they're, why would we expect that we're going to have one versus the other just naturally, um, is crazy, which is what I did. I mean, the first time that I even heard the term sports psych was in Cincinnati. And I remember having a conversation with Mary Lee Tracy saying, I have to be honest, I'm 20 years old. This makes me nervous to try to think about what I think, because I feel like what I've done has worked and I don't know what I was doing, but please don't ask me to, like, I don't want to break it down. Like, I was terrified of it, right? Like, but in hindsight, like, it's one of the things I'm probably most grateful for, is an introduction to like what it is. Because I say, sometimes I was like, look, I never learned a straddle split that went all the way down. Like, my body did that, right? For other people, you're trying to, piece it together to try to do it. That doesn't mean that there aren't thousands of other things that, I need to be able to learn how to do. And so it's been fascinating to, kind of start down that, in that way, like, just what are more tools that we can keep having to teach all of the skills. And it's to every single person who's in here.
Well, I mean, what you're fundamentally talking about is learning process, right? The first thing you said is, how does this sport work? Like, this is coming from like an Olympic medalist or world champion saying, how does this sport work, right? But that's what's cool, is like you're always learning. And then you said like it's supposed to be challenging, and like, let's try this, let's try that. And so like the reason that's so important, by the way, and I don't know if you noticed this, but as you were saying that, as you started talking, you started smiling, and you like were visibly getting happier, right? And the reason that's also really cool is because our brains like to learn. Like, that's what they like to do. And so when you start to find different ways to be like, huh, this is supposed to be challenging, let's try this, let's try this. Or when this arm does this, like when you can continue to find a way to learn, even though
Yep.
you've been doing it your whole life, right? Like, how much more could you learn? But when you can still find ways to learn and learn more about the sport, learn more about the mechanics, learn more about what this works, learn more about what works for this person versus that person, you're looking for learning opportunities, and learning opportunities then stimulate your brain. Your brain gets excited, right? Your
Yep.
brain gets excited. It releases chemicals like dopamine and other things that like now get you even more motivated, more hype. And so like now all of a sudden, the ability to continue to get better and better and better, right? Like, you open up that ceiling because you found ways to be creative, right? Again, in a pretty regimented sport, if you will. And so that's, to me, is really, really neat. The ability to like find ways to make it fun by learning, find ways to like make yourself more relatable to these kids by learning, right? Being able to even like identify certain cues that help calm somebody down, but also potentially look like a gang sign, right? Like all of these things, right? Like this ability to like make something like look hard, but it's also in reality pretty soft, but it's like this
Yep.
cool way of doing it. So again, like we're learning different communication styles, different abilities of like learning how our bodies work, how our communication style. To me, it makes it really, really fun. Now,
Yep.
you also said, you said it's supposed to be challenging. And I'm also a big believer that we learn a lot through our setbacks, through our challenges, right? They shape us in many ways. And you've had several, right? So I wanted you to talk a little bit about one, if not your biggest setback and sort of how that impacted you.
Um, well, first of all, like just bring up the word challenge, like, 'cause I feel like I say this, often out in the gym now, and I'm like, I wish it was a concept that I had like kind of wrapped my head around sooner. Because when I say it feels like it's been like in a very, very recent past, like within like a very small time frame. Um, that I feel like my whole life, what I can remember of it has been with the goal to remove challenges, right? Like you identify it and you're trying to just like, if I could just remove that and I could just remove that. And again, this goes from whether it's a skill problem or it was, cleaning my room problem or a this or that, you know what I mean? Like it was like, how can I get rid of the problems? I mean, the challenges instead of like the freedom that it has given to go, that's not the objective at all, right? The objective is there is challenge, there will continue to be challenge, and I'm still going to be on the, and we give the analogy of kind of like a dartboard, right? Like we're not trying to just always hit the center. Like it's to be on the board, right? Like it's that we will go through challenge, like period. That will be it. So we're literally every day going like, what are the cards that we draw to get to play today, right? That it's not to, well, I started with this hand yesterday and it was the best hand that I've ever had. And so I get to pick it up from where that's at the next day. You go, nope, we're getting a whole new set, right? And then we just go with what that is. I don't know. It just that trying to keep that, not that I stay to it all the time, but I have tried to intentionally feel that and say that to myself when I start walking through it. You know what I mean? This like idea of like, oh, like I just want to get rid of that. I don't want that in my life. I don't like that. I don't like that. Instead, going, it is, and that's okay. And now where do we go from here? I have the cards in my hand and I still want to play. So,
Well, think about it this way, and this might be helpful, right? Because it's about how we think about it, right? And so if your goal is I need to remove it because it's getting in my way, then it's an obstacle, right?
mhm.
And obstacles are uncomfortable and we want to avoid them. But if you reframe it and you say, look, this is actually about leaning into the challenge because like doing a split is challenging. But if I can go a little bit further, and like that's even more challenging. If I go a little bit further, now I'm getting closer to like the excellence, right? Or like being upright, upside down on a bar is challenging. But if I can hold it a little bit longer and my toes can be a little bit straighter, right? My feet can be a little bit more together, that's even more challenging. But guess what? That's more points,
Yeah,
right? And so going into the challenge and thinking of the challenge as
as
that's
the
where
as
you
the
become
positive, right?
great. Like that's
Exactly.
where you
Like,
become
because
great.
then we're striving for challenge, right? Like I can't
Exactly.
wait for this challenge versus I just want to get through it. I want it to go away, right? I mean, like
Exactly.
it's
Then that obstacle
that
becomes an
that kind
opportunity, right? The
absolutely.
obstacle becomes an opportunity.
Yeah.
And that's where the growth happens, right? And so now, because your sport is challenging, but guess what? The more challenging skills you do, the more points you get. Like the higher level of difficulty, the more challenging skills you do, the more the crowd oohs and ahs.
Well, or I mean, just even to taking the personal fulfillment of it. I mean, I talk about that all the time too. Like that we could come in here and you have level 10 elite level athletes and here we go. We could come in here every day and go through your, level 6, level 7 skills and we'll do that, right? I feel like your ability to have low amount of challenge is there. But now you're talking the fulfillment side, right? Like so then it's wouldn't you like how do you look at challenge in that way then, right? Would you rather have challenge like that? Then it's I get to go for this challenge versus I'm stuck and I, like I said, want to get rid of it. Like I don't want that challenge. Go like, well, which one fills you, right? The
Exactly. And
attempt
one,
of it, and even if you don't get it, right? Like, can you walk out of the gym? And we have, one of the days during the week that they, the girls go through, like, if they see anything on anybody else that they applaud. And those are usually, skill oriented and stuff like that. But the things that are most fulfilling is when you hear them say, they went for this. It didn't work out, but they went for it, right? Like that feels good. And, just a reminder, even if you just close your eyes for a second and go like, I was amazing today from just walking in and doing it with intention, even though on paper, the black and white doesn't look pretty, right? The score isn't high. It doesn't go in the win column. Like it is a win because of what you feel like, because you were walking towards challenge and you're walking towards challenge together with a team of people who are just trying to figure out this puzzle today and then the next puzzle and, put another one. We're going to draw another, hand tomorrow. Are you going to try it
Exactly.
again? So
Exactly. No, I love that. I think that's such a huge perspective shift that makes those quote unquote challenging moments more fun because that's when they're more rewarding. I mean, think about any good book you've ever read or any good movie you've ever seen. It's full of challenge. It's full of challenge. It's full of struggle. And then you come out at the end, you're like, man, that was so cool. Like I feel rewarded. I feel like that was a great, I got better even reading it or watching it or even in these experiences. So I really appreciate the way, and it's really cool to see that like that's a recent shift, right? That again, after all these years of doing it and doing it, that you're continuing to learn and seeing how things are different.
well, I mean, honestly, besides not knowing another way, I mean, I was afraid to change things. I mean, again, I know I'm kind of big on like analogies, but like I used to say, look, most gymnasts will know, right, that you don't want to throw your head back to, let's say, do a double salto, or you don't want to throw your head back, right? But if you just take that part out, you will likely land on your head, right? If you keep everything the same and you were using the momentum of your head throwing backwards to make it around, it's not a good idea to just remove it because you will still fail and fail in a bad way too, right? So I feel like an awareness of it first of like, I can feel my head go back. And that was even just with like trying different perspective of like, how can I walk through this life in this sport? Um, but being patient to try to learn different ways, right? So if the goal is I want to be able to go high enough and rotate enough, right? Can I learn other ways that it can work? Um, and that's been a slow process, right? Because it's different, right? Because you say, well, but I've always thrown my head back, right? Even though I know I don't feel really comfortable with that, it's the way. I'm so grateful for this generation of athletes to be able to have that this conversation is out there and open and that we can kind of talk through. Look, there are so many things that were done that are not the most efficient way, or maybe I mean, I always say like there's things that we don't know that we're doing that will have side effects later that, that we can look back on and say, okay, that worked with the black and white, but it caused these side effects. Um, is there another way? It's crazy to even know that there are the side effects, how resistant like that I have felt on going, try something else. And I'm like, yeah, but I don't know what else is going to work. Right. And that's what I'm saying. It's been like a partnership um, with the people that I work with around here, with the athletes that I get to work with their parents, of like just being able to be open of like, look, I know how I've experienced this and I believe that we can improve upon it. But I don't know, like, but I'm willing to try. Like, let's go in and know like intentionally what we're trying and what we're afraid of being you know, the
Yeah.
outcome.
Yeah. It's cool. So I'm going to answer your question for you because initially I said, what's the biggest challenge? But I think, no, but listen, here's where I'm going with this because you've brought this up. Like you've had injuries, you've had
Yeah.
setbacks, like, all these other things. But ultimately, it sounds like one of the biggest challenges has really been changing your perspective and the way you approach things, right? And taking this way of thinking and doing and being like, but I've always done it this way. And again, it's brought you some success, a lot of success, but also then being willing to sort of think about things differently and trying to approach things differently. Like to me, that's like, it's relatively easy to say, well, I had this injury and I had this injury and I didn't get this medal and this happened and that happened. And those are all things, but like to really talk about it in a manner of like, learning how to think differently, learning how to use language differently, learning how to approach things differently. Like that's something that we don't always think about as a challenge, but it's an of ever evolving challenge. And in some ways, that's always going to be the biggest challenge we're ever going to face, right? Because the other
I
stuff we move
absolutely
past, right?
agree. I mean, but that's the one thing, right? Don't get me on the like, what's the world problem, right? I mean, it really is. It's an ability or a lack of ability to communicate, and that doesn't mean what we want to say. It's it coming together to have a meaning for someone right now that we can converse, right? Go back and forth versus just saying it because we feel
Right.
it, right? Like it's been really hard. I mean, but I'm like I said, I feel very thankful is it's been therapeutic to me, honestly, to be able to use something that I love so much with the sport of gymnastics, for a vehicle to even just understand like who am I and how can how do other people impact me in a positive way or a negative way, right? And then the same vice versa. Then it's not, I used to say it's like an opportunity as a coach, but it truly is. If we're going to step out on the floor, it's an obligation, I think, to understand ourselves and what we're doing and what we're saying and how we're doing it. And I mean, I've walked through really hard situations that and times in life that I don't feel good about, right? Like the one thing I can look back on is I can understand I've tried to understand the person, why would those have been choices or, you know what I mean? And a lot of it is lack of like other tools to like, how do you walk forward with it? And that scenario of going like, well, I know I don't like to throw my head back, but it will get me to my feet, right?
Right.
Instead of, really trying to seek out people who can either give that information. That's why it's so nice right now that this is an ongoing conversation. So the athletes aren't going to be able to change very effectively without us in any of these adult roles or coaching roles and parenting roles if we're not intentional on how we can keep getting better.
So I know you're big on analogies, and hopefully it's evident in this conversation that I'm big on language, right? And being
Yes.
intentional with
Yeah.
what we say, right? And framing and reframing things. So you said a second ago that it's an obligation, right? It's an obligation. Um, and in some ways, when we think of obligation, we think of responsibility, right? And we talk a lot about coaches have this responsibility. But I think of it as a privilege, right? Because what a cool opportunity. You said it's been therapeutic to take this sport you love and to learn more about who you are, how you interact with other people, how you impact other people, right? Like, yes, it's a responsibility. Yes, it's an obligation, but it's also a privilege, right? Because you get to do something with something you love that's been such a big part. Like, it was your playground. Like, you looked at your playground and, like, now you're playing on your playground every day. But not only are you playing on your playground every day, there's other kids that are coming in your sandbox and they're coming and going and you're teaching them. But like you're learning about yourself, right? Like you're learning about yourself through all of these young people, but also even in the way you interact with the sport and the way you communicate the sport and how you teach the sport and constantly challenging yourself, right? To evolve and think differently. And so to me, like, you talked about your resistance to seeing a sports psych, like, but what better opportunity to put yourself in these situations where theoretically you feel comfortable because you've known gymnastics your whole life, but you're navigating it in a way that makes it uncomfortable and you're learning, right? And so this safe, supportive environment, right? Earlier I talked about, the balance of, being in a pressure situation and getting better, but also feeling safe and supported. So like, the gym, you've been walking in the gym every day for your whole life. And so to some extent it's safe and supportive, but also this ability to continue excel as a coach, right? And navigate that through your experiences and through talking to parents and kids. Like that's such a cool privilege. Like there's no better therapy environment, right? Where
Oh,
it looks
I,
fun, but you're like
it
learning.
almost makes me feel like I'm being silly or with the amount of times I feel like I say that I'm grateful. Like it has been huge. I mean, 'cause, there was a time in life where I really did. I mean, with our sport, our world going through, it really had it did have me I got to the base question of, is this thing even good, right? This sport that I have, like, that feels like it's a part of my makeup. Like, is it possible to be a part of it and it still be, I'd hate to use that such a general term, but is it good? Right? Because there are opportunities for it to be, destroying, kind of someone's self-worth and who you are, and lead down, bad, paths in pursuit of trying to do something with excellence, right? I feel like the biggest part of it has been kind of that release of striving for perfection. I can still remember, actually, Marta had said, it was in 2016, that, her term was strive for perfection. And I remember thinking, oh, this is going to be so cool. Like, I'm going to look for something that says strive for perfection, right? And I'll get it for, bring it out to the ranch and we'll have it out there. And I was like, I felt so silly as I was searching it. There's no such thing, right? You see, striving for improvement, strive for your best, strive all of these things, but there's not strive for perfection, right? Like, but that concept, and like being able to let go of, you don't, like, there has to be like a thought that it's possible to do better, and that we're going to keep excelling. And that's where I keep saying this is not a black and white, I mean, or one or the other, that we're either going to just, everybody gets a ribbon and everybody's amazing and wonderful, and still, trying for challenge, and to, find what that little extra layer, like you're saying, if I can go down in this split, like, can I make it a little bigger? Can I go a little higher? Can I add a twist? They're not mutually exclusive, right? That it's one or the other, but kind of taking that off. Like, I think back on like what I had naturally as a kid learning this sport was, I didn't know when I would try a new skill or a new correction, or, like something like that, that it was going to work, but I sure was willing to give it a try to see what was going to happen, and like, it's crazy because you see this even out in sport, like somebody that's afraid to do differently because they don't want to mess up, right? Or they don't want to speak up because they don't want to say the wrong thing, or they don't want this to be, what I mean? But I mean, I hesitate on sending emails half the time. So like, I feel like it needs to be like publish worthy, what I mean? Like, but it kind of brings back all of those, like, as I'm going through it, going, you're doing it again, right? Be okay with that. You're going to give it your best try. And that doesn't mean that you are accepting um, less than success, right? That if anything, it empowers and inspires to do it again. Just go back and try it again. Like, go back, try it again, try it
Right.
again, try it again. And I'm going to be with a team of people who are going to go like, that was a good try. Didn't work, but try it again. Let's try this different. It might work, maybe it won't, right? But we're going to do it together.
Exactly. Look, I'm gonna teach you one last thing before we hang up, and you're gonna
Okay.
love this one. So let's say perfection was a real thing. Let's say it was. Let's say it existed,
Such a silly
right?
thing that we didn't call it a perfect
But
score.
let's say,
It makes me feel
right,
like such a little
right.
when you say it, 'cause I'm like, I don't think I've ever done anything that felt like, yep.
So that's if it did. Let's say perfection existed. Then here's the thing: how would you get any better? You couldn't get any better, right? Like, so people think perfection is this high bar. I actually think that it's a lower standard, because if you hit it, there's only one direction to go, right? So what I think you should do in your gym, right? And if I find it, I'm going to buy it for you as a gift, but I'm just telling you now, I think you need a sign that says excellence over perfection, because excellence is the growth. It's continuing to try it again. Like you said, excel. You actually said that word
Yeah.
after you were talking about how silly perfection is. But excellence to me is limitless. You can grow, you can evolve, you can try things, right? Because you're always trying to excel, and there's no limit. So it's just up and up and up. And whereas perfection, even if it did exist, you can't get any better. So then what do you do? Right. And so to me, that's something that I talk a lot about with athletes, particularly athletes who strive for perfection,
Mhm.
right? Many of whom are gymnasts, but not everyone. And it's this idea of understanding that excellence is actually a higher standard and it's more achievable, right? So that's the sign I think you should get. And if I find it, it's a gift from me to you.
Yeah.
And then you'll always know that Dr. T is down in Texas with you guys. But anything else? I mean, I could talk to you forever, and I hope we have many more conversations. But anything else that you want to add before we end?
Gosh, now you have me on the spot. I don't know. Nothing's coming to mind. I'm sorry. I feel like we could have kept talking for hours, but
Where Kim, where can people learn about what you're doing and learn about your gym?
um, well, I my gym is Texas Dreams Gymnastics, and it's in Coppell, Texas, which is a part of the big Dallas, Fort Worth area. We're just north of the airport, and um, yeah, we're in here out, 7 days a week. People in here doing their thing, and hopefully we can keep learning from each other. I mean, it's probably like as I'm, kind of thinking through, like that feels like the biggest thing, like what a gift it is to find something that you can attach yourself to, that you like the art of it and the creativity and the people and how to evolve. We have a sign on the entryway, which is my favorite quote, that's have a dream so big you could never achieve it and become the gymnast who can. Because it's not about you actually, like whether or not it will actually come to happen, right? And those are even experiences that I've had, right? I feel like when I was the very best that I felt like I was in my career, I jumped out of bounds and, medals went away right that second. But at the end of the day, I can look back and I feel the accomplishment in it was becoming the person who can, becoming the gymnast who can. And, it's exciting to be able to be a part of something still for, I mean, so now I've been a part of this sport for, 40 plus years, and that part won't change. And it doesn't matter what level or what you're trying to do in any sport, that you can become the person who can.
I love it. Listen, I really, really want to thank you. I remember watching you compete. Um, you know, it was just so funny. Like my brother and I were both wrestlers. We both wrestled in college. And we're watching the Olympics. And, at that time, very few Olympic sports are on TV, but, gymnastics on there. And then we're picking our favorites, right? Like, right. And just
Triple
F
cast.
FYI, you were my
I
favorite.
date myself. Thank you.
You were my and he liked Carrie Strug.
Yes.
Um, but we were like, it's just so funny to and the reason I'm bringing this up is just watching you as a gymnast, right? And now being able to have this conversation with you as a person, right? And so I'm incredibly grateful to you for your time, for your experience, for what you're continuing to do in this sport. I hope other people enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. If you did, consider leaving me a 5-star review on Apple Podcast, iTunes, Google Play, Spotify. If you don't have access, email me your thoughts, mindsettraininginstitute@gmail.com. If you want to learn more about me and my work, mindsettraininginstitute.com. I'm also on Instagram at Dr. T underscore sports psych, SPORTS PSYCH. The most creative gymnastics thing you're going to see me is doing, handstand push-ups. But other than that, I'm not going to be
But
able to
what you
do
are
much
doing
more.
is incredible. I love that this conversation, and I really do mean it by a conversation, like there's so much value in continued conversation on it and perspective, and how we can all as humans keep helping each other to have new tools and try something that's going to help us all be better.
Absolutely. And you know what? I'm not going to say anything else because that's a perfect way of ending it. So I want everybody to think great, feel great, and be great. Mindset is everything.